Here, exactly.
How all of this happened? Actually, Tom, it's a long time since the Mystery of the Sphinx came out. The video. How many people have seen Mystery of the Sphinx? A lot who haven't, but right? So quite a few. Anyway, so briefly the story. I'll go into the antecedents of the story on one of the long bus trips, because everybody always asks me how I got into this, and it's a long story. So I'll just cut in at the part where Egypt cuts in, because I didn't start off as a rogue Egyptologist. I started out as a writer, screenwriter, novel published, book of short stories, few plays, etc., etc. Never ever thought I was going to do anything like scholarship, and it just kind of came across. I'm really a scholar by default and a writer by trade, which turns out to have an advantage, because most of my colleagues who are scholars and scientists do not have the word power to make it all fun to read, and I do. I'm a satirist by trade. Anyway, at a very early age, I was not one of these tiresome prodigies playing Beethoven at the age of 5, but I would say, psychologically precocious, and I knew by the time I was 12 or 13 that I'd been brought up in a lunatic asylum, which was very clear to me that everybody around me was crazy, including myself, and lying. Anyway, about 19, I knew what I wanted to do, and that was to be the little boy who said, "The emperor has no clothes," and that's what I set out to do. Anyway, fast forward to Giza, where I got acquainted first with the Gurdjieff work, and first with astrology and all of the Hermetic disciplines and so on. And then Egypt popped up after I left Giza. I'd been there for 9 years and moved to England with my first wife. And more long story, but I got somebody in. I went in there to join one of the Gurdjieff groups, and I don't know how many of you know Gurdjieff. Who doesn't know about Gurdjieff? One. Well, by the end of the trip, you'll know something. Not a lot, but you'll know. Anyhow, I was writing the first sort of accidental book of non-fiction, which was called The Case for Astrology, and I was doing research trying to prove that it was not, as it was thought to be, by the academic community, a sort of a Chaldean or Babylonian superstition made rational or rationalized by the Greeks. It was much, much older and much more important. And somebody in my Gurdjieff group recommended a book called Herbach by a woman named Isha Shwala-Delubich. And I went to I was living in London, the one esoteric bookstore in London called Watkins, still there. And sure enough, they had it, and translated from the French, and I started reading this book, which was a terrible novel. It's not so easy to write a good novel, but the picture of Egypt that it presented was absolutely riveting and corresponded in detail and in the main with Gurdjieff, who tells stuff. He tells it on a take it or leave it basis. It's a different experience. It's not like reading Gurdjieff. It's not like reading a normal book. Anyway, in doing it, Isha, it's a novel, but it had lots and lots of footnotes, and talking about the book called Le Temple de l'Homme, The Temple of Man, by her husband, R.A. Shwala-Delubich. At a certain point, I was so intrigued by this picture of Egypt, and I was working on the book of astrology, Case for Astrology, and I went to the British Museum, and sure enough, they had a copy, brand new. I mean, it had never been cut. The old days French books used to come with the signatures uncut. You had to cut them yourself. It was sort of a rite of passage. I'm sorry they lost that. It was fun doing that, sort of deflowering the book, as it were. And so there was the book. It had been published first in '57, and no one had ever taken it out and cut the pages. So I started going through it, and by this time, I was a pro. I mean, I had a lot of stuff published, never made any money, but just if you're a musician, you listen to somebody play a scale, and you know if that person can play the instrument. If you're a ball player, you watch a guy swing the bat, and you get a good idea of whether or not he knows the game. So I can go through a book and go, and I get an intuitive sense of what's going on. And when I did this with Shwala's, with the Temple of Man, I mean, it it was like a revelation. I said, this guy has really done it. He has put together the wisdom of the ancients. The problem was that I didn't speak French, or barely, kind of entry-level French, so I just took a year out of my life, went to the library. I couldn't find a copy of the book in French. It was out of print already. And with the dictionary by my side, got enough, went through and understood enough to put a chapter into the case for astrology, which didn't really belong there. It was just that I thought it was so important. So I put it there, and then publishers came to me and said, would you do a book on this guy Schwaller, who had only his wife's book had been translated? And I said, yeah, you bet, that really interests me. And then, in doing the research for that, in the book called Now Everything is Schwaller's, is translated, just about everything, and highly recommended. I mean, if your 2 weeks in Symbolist Egypt really grips you, and you want to take it further, you've got to go to the master himself and start reading Schwaller. Not easy. It's very impenetrable prose, even in English, and it's a masterful translation. Anyway, so in one of the ancillary books of Schwaller's, he's talking about the chronology of Egypt and the Egyptian belief that their own civilization stretched back many, many thousands of years, back before dynastic Egypt, which starts about 3500 BC. And he had a scholarly argument citing works by mostly the writers of Greco-Roman antiquity, the 2nd or so century BC to 2nd or 3rd centuries AD, who were in contact with the last of the Egyptian priests. So there was a lot of scholarly references, which were really interesting. It was a very, very well constructed argument, but it's not science. It's still interpretation. Just as there are better and worse books of, let's say, biblical exegesis or arguments about what Shakespeare meant, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not science. And then all of a sudden, at the very end of this chapter, there was a single line that said, oh yes, and of course the Great Sphinx of Giza shows unmistakable signs of aquatic erosion. When I read that, the penny dropped in the slot, and I said, that was potentially science. And if you could prove that, again, without going into a long palaver, it would mean that the Sphinx, the most spectacular sculpture on Earth, had to be much, much older than anybody thought, by a lot. And again, this is a long story, which I'll probably get into somewhere along the line. So I went to the library, and I'm not a geologist, but I know how to read, and did a lot of research, and it seemed that that Schwaller was correct, that only this kind of weathering could only happen by water, one way or another. And then I published Serpent, and nobody paid any attention to it. And I got friendly with a guy named Robert Eddy, who was teaching English at Boston University. And he had been teaching at the American University of Cairo, teaching English a few years, and became acquainted with first the Serpent, and I don't think I'd published the guidebook yet, but he got very intrigued by the symbolist interpretation, and we got friendly. And at one point we were having a dinner, and he said, you know, this symbolist interpretation really should be a lot more public than it is. And I said, yeah, you bet it should be. But then he said, well, is there anything in my position as an academic to help? And I said, instantly, I said, yeah, find me an open-minded geologist to look into the water weathering theory or hypothesis. And I laughed, and he said, what are you laughing at? And I said, well, I know from experience that finding an open-minded scientist is about as easy as finding a fundamentalist Christian who loves his enemies. And he said, no, wait a minute, there's a guy in my class, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, long and short, eventually he put me in touch with Robert Schock, and Schock wouldn't even talk to me until he was up for tenure. And I understood that. Sounds like a cop-out, but it isn't. All your colleagues have to know is that you're looking for the A word, Atlantis, lost civilization, no tenure. So I understood that perfectly well. And then eventually got to meet Schock, and this is another long, long story, which maybe I'll tell if the bus breaks down and I have enough time. But it's a long story. And eventually we got over here, we published, there's all kinds of characters, or interesting characters that are involved in this. We finally got permission to go and do our work here against the wishes of the formidable Zahi Hawass, who I'm now sort of kind of on a personal level quite friendly with. That chapter in the eventual book that will come out on this is going to be called Kafka Comes to Cairo, because it was a nightmare getting our work done. One thing led to another. All of a sudden we get introduced to Charlton Heston, we get past the secretaries at NBC, and our video came out and was a huge, I mean, it didn't make any money because my partner in it stole $150,000 from the till, so we could not carry on with our work. But without him, it never would have happened. He's no longer on this plane, but is ripping off people somewhere else, I suppose. And I don't even begrudge him it, because without him it wouldn't have happened. But anyway, what's that? This wasn't a thread. With Boris. Oh yeah, and so I can't resist telling this part of the story. We presented this at the GSA, that's Geological Society of America, annual meeting in '91 in San Diego, and that's the sort of the Super Bowl of geology at the GSA. Everybody who's got anything new and interesting reveals it there. Jacques and I had written an abstract to get our presentation accepted, and we spent a whole afternoon making it as boring as possible so they wouldn't get scared. And it turned out they saw right through it, and they called a big press conference, and we were the hit of the show. And I mean, this was international headlines all over the world, scientific, mainstream. It was out there. And at one point, and so reporters were there and interviewing Jacques and myself. I mean, Jacques was, it was his impeccable Yale credentials that got us in there. It wouldn't have been me. Anyway, Jacques, everybody's interviewing us, and at one point, Jacques taught at Boston University. The science editor at Boston University interviewed Jacques, who was very polite and academic, and then interviewed me, and I'm not so polite and academic. And he said, well, why is it, he said, that the geologists all seem to agree with you, which they did unanimously. No one even disagreed. And Jacques said the geologists at this gig are quick to disagree if they find fault. And he said, well, why are the archaeologists and the Egyptologists so incensed by this? And I said, well, listen, this theory is entirely about weathering patterns on rocks. And when it comes to weathering patterns on rocks, an archaeologist and an Egyptologist's opinion is no better than a proctologist. And they published that. and so this did not make us too many friends. And at Jacques at Boston University, there was a woman who shall be nameless here, Egyptologist, who wrote a scathing personal attack on Jacques in the local BU in-house paper. And I said to Jacques, you can't let it get away with this, Jacques. You gotta say something. And Jacques said, no, just let it go. And I said, well, do you mind if I say something? And he said, no, you go ahead. So I wrote her a personal letter, and I said, I understand that you at the archaeology department at BU took exception to my proctologist remark, and I said, I just want you to know that the proctologists didn't like it either. they said their job was to cure sick assholes. They didn't like being compared to them. So that made us still more friends. And what this stupid woman did was to send a letter to the entire Egyptological community, which is exactly what I would have loved to have done on my own, but I didn't even have a list to do it. So, one thing led to another, and all of a sudden was this big video with Charlton Heston, and I won an Emmy, and the battle has been raging ever since. And the evidence has been accumulating. We'll be looking at some of it today, because it's not just the Sphinx itself. There's a lot of stuff on the Giza Plateau that's part of the whole plan, and the argument raised against us, which was really ultimate. I mean, there are a couple of geologists who disagree with us, with hypotheses that range from just plain wrong to exceptionally stupid, but all of them are very easily refuted. And But the one argument that they raised, which is not really an argument, was that it's impossible. We don't care about the geology, but it was all hunter-gatherers back then. So how could they have built what is arguably the most spectacular sculpture on Earth, and the temples around it, which are equally spectacular when we go in them and you see what's involved in them architecturally. Anyway, so there we stood, and for all of these years, and we needed a smoking gun. How many of you have heard of Göbekli Tepe? Anybody not heard of Göbekli Tepe? One. It's this incredible ceremonial site in Turkey that was deliberately buried at some time in the very distant past. So anyway, that's our smoking gun, because there's no argument. And this is a site covering many acres, comprised of 22 or 24 closely packed, substantial stone circles, like mini Stonehenges, but not that many. They date it, without going into a long palaver about how they do it, to about 10,000 BC or earlier, and the central pillars of these stone circles are slabs of stone weighing 10 to 15 tons, very elegantly and carefully carved in high relief, which is the most difficult kind of carving to do. You paint, let's say you want to do a tiger, you draw a tiger on the stone, and then you cut the rest of the stone away so that the tiger emerges from the stone. This is a very difficult kind of sculpture, and nobody has ever found a tool at this ceremonial site. So this is our smoking gun, and this is why we're now looking, shocking myself, and looking to gather the forces to put the money together to do a major sequel, or maybe even a mini-series, following up on the Mystery of the Sphinx, which was a game changer back then, but which has been, to a certain extent, not in no sense refuted by the archaeological community, Egyptological community, but it has been pretty successfully marginalized, with the press, needless to say, I call them the prostitutes, taking the side of the quackademic establishment. So this is where we stand now, and now let's go and look at some of the water weathering and other elements involved in this ongoing search. Okay. Okay, what I'll do is here, because it really is complicated. If we wanted to, we could spend a few hours out here. Oh, and I should say now, actually, that one of our intentions has been trying to do this for years, but we haven't managed to do it. And that is to get a panel of geologists together with the relevant expertise in relevant fields, and a panel of geologists who agree with us, or who at least are open to it, and a panel of anybody who disagrees with us, and get them here for a couple of weeks. It's not cheap, but we probably need about $400,000 or $500,000 to get them here and pay for the hotels and all the rest of it, and have them sort of argue it out over the course of a couple of weeks, and then publish papers and make it official once and for all, and see if we can get this water weathering question solved once and for all. But so that's still hanging fire. But just to give you a few of the points here, you see, when you look, you see the different repair blocks, you see the different repair campaigns, and you recognize instantly that they're very different from each other. This is all modern stuff. Up there is not that modern. In fact, the rough stuff over there is still older. And the very back, at the very bottom, you see the clay curls around. That's typical of Old Kingdom masonry. And John will corroborate this. Where's architect John? John. Yeah, John. In architectural history, right, when you see two different styles employed in the same building, you know pretty much for sure that you have two different periods of a building. I mean, roughly speaking, if you have a Victorian house and you've got a kitchen designed by IKEA, anybody knows that you don't go there and say, wow, they had a Victorian IKEA. You know that somebody repaired the kitchen. So when you see different styles, and the archaeologists themselves agree with us. Mark Lehner, the Royal Opposition, who I know fairly well. He's got to come up, he's coming. But he's done very careful work and misinterpreted his own findings, which is weird. But he acknowledges that the earliest repair block, that the Sphinx was already weathered into its present condition when the first repair blocks were applied. Now the Sphinx was supposedly built by the pharaoh Khafra around carved around 2400 BC. So that's the Old Kingdom. And more on this as we go along too. Don't get impatient. Somewhere along the line, things will get covered. And if you have a question, by the way, just chime in with it. I don't mind getting interrupted. I find my way back. So don't worry real seriously, because then you forget, or hold the question and remember it, write it down. So Lehner acknowledges that the oldest repair blocks are typical of Old Kingdom masonry. But then he says, well, they've been cannibalized they're really done later in the New Kingdom, about 1,000 years later, but they've been cannibalized from earlier structures. This is impossible, as a matter of fact, because they're all form-fit to fit into the grooves, into the weathered grooves of the Sphinx itself. Yes, Carlos?
So one question. I read the Serpent in the Sky, the last edition, and I have a question. The typical Mr. Lerner and all these Egyptologists,
yes,
after your book, I understand that they, at the end, they stopped talking about the wind and sun, right?
That's right, yeah, they now agree that it's...
At least they agree with that, right?
Yeah.
They don't accept yours,
no.
But they stop doing theirs, right?
Yeah, they come up with really cockeyed things that we'll see them in a little bit, Lehner flakes, and there's some other jackass who the wet sand theory, that you have wet sand that builds up against the walls of the Sphinx, and that creates the erosion. But this is moronic, because it means that, this is really stupid, that it means that everything on the Giza Plateau that's been covered by sand has been covered by wet sand, so everything should look like this. And what's more, it absolutely doesn't account for the enclosure itself, where the back part is drastically, you don't even get a sense of it the way looking at here. When we go up there, you'll see how much more weathered that western end is from this end. So if it's wet sand and it's all the same member of limestone, how can this be? An even dumber theory is put forward by a very important Egyptian geologist named Farouk El-Baz. You will get a kick out of this. Where's my resident geologist? Oh, there she is. Farouk El-Baz, who's an imaging expert. He's an expert at decoding space photography, or from whatever. And he contended back in the 80s that the Sphinx was actually... Do you know this, Lane, that Farouk El-Baz's theory that the Sphinx is the Yardang?
I have heard something, about that,
This is really stupid, because the Yardang is something that forms on a desert, and the sand whirls around, and it eventually weathers away, or erodes away, in this case, the softer material, and leaves this thing that sometimes takes weird and spectacular forms, as they do out west. But the Sphinx is self-evident. You had to cut the stuff away to make the body of the Sphinx, so it can't possibly have been this. And Schock tells me, he was at Yale at that time, that he and the other geologists, PhD students, were laughing at El-Baz, who's a big reputation, and this was one of the stupidest theories ever put forward. But this is the kind of stuff we have to contend with. Anyway, so where was I? I was losing this. Oh, with the weathering, with Lehner acknowledging that the earliest, that the Sphinx had been. This is really, we shouldn't be fighting this battle 30 years later, because if the Sphinx is weathered into its present condition when the first repair blocks were applied, and the repair blocks themselves are acknowledged as Old Kingdom masonry, there shouldn't be an argument anywhere, because if the Sphinx is already carved into its, already weathered into its present condition, it doesn't look it from here. But if you look at where the repair blocks meet the body, the core body of the Sphinx there, that's about 3 feet of weathering, assuming that the body itself is repaired back to its original contour. So there's nothing that weathers in 1,000 years, no building material that weathers 3 feet in the space of 1,000 years, except maybe ice, and they weren't building igloos. So we shouldn't have to be taught. We should be doing research and carrying for.
Sir, but if they don't accept your theory and they stop telling theirs, I'm confused. What do they are telling these days?
Well, they have different theories, and they don't realize that they're self-contradictory. The preferred theory at the moment is the salt crystallization theory, where let's see, we'll find them where the, correct me if I have it, but basically it's that water, limestone is porous, and it has mineral deposits in it, and eventually the water sort of soaks in as if to a very hard sponge, and then it effloresces on the outside, forming these kind of, I call them Lehner flakes. They look like big potato chips. We'll see them as we go along there. So that's preferred theory at the moment, but that's as indefensible as any of the other dumb theories. So anyway, that's where it stands now, Carlos. Yeah, they don't. They just ignore it, and they will keep on ignoring it as long as they can afford to ignore it, which isn't much longer. That's the time is coming sometime soon when we'll talk about more of this as we go along too, because I'm hoping I can somehow or another get Zahid to change his mind publicly. We'll see if it can be done. Anyway, let's go look at some more stuff down here. And chip in with questions whenever you want.
I do have a question.
This is old before
It's all right, I left
front left pocket.
about 15, 20 below zero.
I think it's in the front left pocket.
Would you like my coat?
Yeah, I'd love it.
I'm not sure. It's not there.
My hands are cold.
There.
Now, actually, here it is. You're right. This little shrine, beautiful little shrine, is built by Amenhotep III, and it's got some interesting features about it. If you look here, you'll see right in the middle, from here, you'll see that the head of the thing
Thank you.
perfectly framed. Good photo op, right?
Thank you.
Perfectly framed. Within here. If you look at this one on this side, you're right in the middle.
Wow.
And you see that the
Interesting.
Great Pyramid is similarly framed.
See, the Egyptians invented TV.
Right. So then you wonder, okay, this is clearly deliberate, you know, cite it this way by
What is
accident.
this frame and what is
So the question is then, what is that cited on? Whatever it is not there anymore, but it might be astronomical. It might be a solstice or something, maybe. Somebody has to do the work.
What's interesting is that if the pyramid is aligned on north, south, east, west faces, this would be exactly 90 degrees opposite, right?
Right,
So it's like,
Yeah.
there's
So
something to that.
So that's a nice little,
Sorry.
actually on the last trip, just finishing now with the Enneagram Institute, I keep saying, I mean, this would be an interesting study here. And I keep doing this, saying, you know, this would make a nice, big study, a PhD for somebody. And one of the women on the trip who was doing some recording and things said, you know, you should make a list of all of these cool things that are waiting to be done. I mean, meanwhile, the Egyptologists, you know, are busy arguing over Tutankhamun's laundry list. And there are all of these really interesting things that are there to be discovered, and that could be discovered if somebody put the time and effort into it. So we don't know. And then this side here is obviously, it has, you know, the shrine at the back, but it may well be sited on something really significant, maybe even Heliopolis or something fairly distant.
But do we know what the hieroglyphs say?
Oh yeah. This is, I don't do the hieroglyphs, but yeah, those are sort of ceremonial, and anybody with a basic knowledge of hieroglyphs, which isn't me, would read that off without much trouble. Great interest, not exactly artistically, but back in the 70s, or somewhere around there, early 70s, maybe even 60s, the weather, whatever the people are who test for water levels, you know, water table levels, were doing a test here, and they drilled down. They were checking, I guess, something of the sort, taking core samples, whatever. And they drilled down here and got down, I think, 22 meters, so that's 70 feet, and hit a piece of granite. That is significant because only granite in Egypt comes from far to the south in Aswan. So if they hit a piece of granite, and they think now, because you see this excavation stuff here is relatively recent, and they think that's part of an old harbor that stretched from the Nile to here. I'm not sure of that. But the granite is interesting because it means that either, if this were a harbor, something fell off into and the harbor, I mean, it's 22 meters, so it's deep. So something is there, or it's part of a structure that's that deep, which would really be significant. I mean, that would be a major discovery.
20 meters or 20 feet?
22 meters. Yeah, meters, so 70 feet.
Isn't the Assyrian about that low?
Not quite.
Or it's like 60 feet?
Different. It's different. The topography is very different there, as you will soon see. But so this is something sort of sitting there, waiting to be explored in a lot more detail, because that could be something of real consequence. Because you see, actually, again, the seismographs tell us this, which you otherwise wouldn't think of. That here, in order to get to the Sphinx, the ground level up there is much higher, so it slopes down. But really, that's all a combination of silt and windblown sand and so on. The seismograph tells us that really the Sphinx is on a hill, not a mountain or anything like that, but it's on a slope, and the ground goes down this way. So all of this is what we're standing on here is not the way it would have looked when the Sphinx was when the Sphinx was in its original condition. So lots more work still to be done. As I said, you keep running into, I mean, some things are really difficult, and you can appreciate that, you know, their unwillingness to look deeper and so on. But something like this, you think it'd be in their own interest to poke down in there and see what they could find, because it could be, no matter what, it's going to be significant. If it's just a piece that's fallen off into the canal, it tells you that the canal is that deep. And if it really is part of a structure, well, that's a game changer. That's a big one.
I don't think they want to find anything that points to anything older than Egyptian ancestry.
This is absolutely true, but it is ancient. They're always telling me, I fight this battle with Zahir all the time, that you're trying to steal Egyptian history. I say, no, it's hard to give it back to them. This is the whole
point. As long as it's Egyptian history.
Yeah, it's Egyptian.
But if the Egyptians kind of moved in and took all this over, that just means they're, they're nothing. They want to hang on to the ego that they built this stuff.
That comes up all the time, all around the world. There are megalithic sites in New Zealand, and the Maori fight it tooth and nail because a lot of their sort of native rights are contingent upon their being the original one. Same in American Indians, who, when something more ancient is found, battle it like mad. The Chinese, not too long ago, discovered in western Mongolia, a burial of obviously somebody Irish or Scottish, in kilts and red hair.
Very inconvenient.
And you're very,
very inconvenient for the local. I mean, people are stupid, and there's nothing you can do about it. Really. So let's go. Anyway, it's not really with the rain falling on it. It's not its usual. It's not at its most photogenic.
So this is a quarry. What is this whole thing?
No, this is called. That's called the Sphinx Temple. Directly in front of the Sphinx. Nobody knows what it was for, or anything about it for that matter. But again, look at the size of the blocks, particularly the one on the bottom. This is, several hundred tons of block. And this is the Valley Temple, always called the Valley Temple of Khafra. And there is a Khafra connection, because from the Sphinx, when you go from the Sphinx, the causeway leads directly to the center of the Khafra pyramid, and to another construction made of these gigantic blocks, which must date from the earlier time. When we get up to Khafra, we'll talk about it, but I'm thinking, where are we here? Right.
John, let me take a picture.
What?
Here.
Okay.
There you go.
Normally, when we hear at the crack of dawn, we come in here, and I like to give people a few minutes to absorb this, but this is useless with the million droppers coming in eating chop suey. So just a few things, and actually, my sense of it is we're going to go from here to. Normally we walk up the whole thing in the sand. We can do that, and we'll go to the Solar Boat Museum, and we can do the stuff that we missed on the day that we actually have the pyramid meditation, because we'll be up here anyhow, and because everybody's, including me, is getting cold and getting wet, and if suddenly a whole group comes down with pneumonia, you'll sue me and all kinds of stuff. Do we have any lawyers here, by the way? Any lawyers around here? Do we?
Yeah, one lawyer.
Oh, okay. Oh,
the one that doesn't look like an attorney.
Okay, so let's just go, because this unfortunately really bears with a substantial amount of explanation, because this is a really spectacular, fantastic place. And you see, it's built in stages, and of course the academics don't accept that. You see over there, you see the core masonry of these gigantic limestone blocks that are weathered, the weathering cut away in order to allow them to put the granite facing on. You'd never know it with all of these people streaming through, but when it's quiet here, it's absolutely fantastic. And this is a thing you want to keep doing as we go through Egypt, is to visualize what it would have been when it was new. And now with computer technology, probably you can, I never tried it myself, but I'll bet you can Google up Valley Temple of Khafra, and they'll have a reconstruction of what it would have been. But what it would have been, this would have been, you see the slots up there around the edges of the ceiling? You see it there? So this would have been roofed over, and the only light coming in would have been indirect. And the floor here is alabaster. I mean, a lot of it is repair work, like stuff John's standing on. But this would have been an alabaster floor, which is kind of odd for a temple, because that's a pretty soft stone. But all of the stones of Egypt had, this is a subject that fascinates Jacques, a symbolism. And so the four elements, basically: fire, earth, water, air. And the fire stones are the granites and the diorites and that sort of thing. Limestone is the water stone, because it is actually what do you call it, a petrified set of, it's coral reefs that have been turned to stone. Alabaster, Shock explained to me, is an air stone, and Shock told me that there's something about the way it forms on lake bottoms, needing oxygen, and sandstone, fairly, obviously enough, is an earth stone. But granite is often used for repair when it's not really necessary at all, and certainly doesn't, it's not necessarily architecturally, it doesn't make anything stronger. And when I first got Shock here, he was really fascinated by the idea of symbolism of stone. And at one point, because I had noticed already that granite was often used when they were refurbishing something or restoring it. And I asked Shock that, what's the geology of granite? And he said, well, it's a stone that's on the surface, and then under cataclysmic conditions, it gets folded back into the earth, into the magma where it dissolves, where it liquefies, and then is extruded up again to the surface as this very hard, effectively eternal stone. And Shock sort of looked over, so he said, well, he said, born again stone. So it's used for those symbolic reasons. And you'll see very interesting tomorrow when we get to Merodach's tomb, where they don't have the money or the will to bring the actual granite down, and they painted limestone to look like granite because it's fulfilling that restorative function in some way, shape, or form. Anyway, here are a couple of really intriguing features. If you look at this stuff, I mean, you can't get a credit card between the blocks. The stonework is so incredible. Very similar, but not as extreme as what you find in Peru. So it's even more geometric and angular and so on. And over here, right, exactly. Yes. Here, you see that these are, I think, John correctly, these are technically inverse coins. These, and you see that the way that they're done. In order to make a corner, they've had to plane away or braid away the whole surface of the stone to do that, and then the whole surface of the stone to do that, and it goes alternately all the way up. And I've asked, whenever I get construction guys or architects on the trip, which is often, I ask them if they think that it serves any structural purpose, and the jury is mostly out, that it doesn't really, that, in other words, doing it this way would be just as earthquake-proof as doing it this way. This isn't going to bind it in any way. So originally, the John theory was that the temple itself, there's no specific word for temple in the ancient Egyptian. It's Perneter, which means the home of or the domicile of the god, and the gods are understood as principles, not as superstitious beings. So in other words, the temple itself is a living structure, and in order to make it as organic as possible, in order to reproduce what nature produces, they do it this way effectively to make, rather than a joint, an articulation like a wrist. And I mean, this is a powerhouse place. You can't miss the power of this place. And I'll get to more in a second, that by doing it this way, the energy can flow, whereas otherwise it would just be blocked. And then on another time here, there were guys who are acoustic engineers, and they say, oh well, that makes perfect sense, because if you're building a speaker and you want it to give you the true resonance, or I think that's not quite the right word, but you always do a rounded corner, because a squared off corner louses up the frequencies. So, which is another way of another piece of evidence that this whole thing is intended to be organic. And then even then, because other people often ask, well, why are they using these gigantic blocks of stone? And the reason is, again, somebody on one of my trips said, well, John, he said, that's because the big stones have more energy. And this is true, and it's funny, because you can't measure at least as far as I know, you can't measure the energy in here. But you can feel it, and you can extrapolate from what we're looking at. So imagine, for example, if these were smaller blocks of granite, this big, the whole thing would feel differently. If they were bricks, it'd feel differently again. It would be the same looking structure, or the same size. Everything would be the same. Proportions would all be the same. It would feel completely different. With cinder blocks, it would be still different. And if you did it with particle board, it would be different again, and yet it would all be the same. And yet it wouldn't be the same at all. So there's a reason behind them doing what they do, and even if you can't prove it, you can feel it.
So do we see any tool marks or any ancient kerf marks, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we do. Occasionally we do. And I have studied that, specifically my pal Chris Dunn.
Yeah.
And he's a smart guy. But it's a tough judgment call, because certain of the things, Chris and other people say you couldn't possibly do this by hand. And then they find these tool marks, but they don't have any tools. And you think, with all of the evidence that we have from ancient Egypt, you see when you get to the museum, all the tools and everything that they have, if they had some kind of high-tech devices, you would think that you'd have some kind of evidence for it, and we don't. So it's another one of the, of the innumerable mysteries that surround all of these things. And the deeper, it's kind of fun, actually. I mean, I don't mind. This is the thing with academics. Academics hate a mystery the way that nature abhors a vacuum. If they can't, they have to explain it. And even if they can't just let it be and say, "Hey, we don't know, guys." You never hear. How often do you ever hear a scientist or a scholar say, "I don't know"? Not much. Because there are reasons for that too. I almost feel compassion for them. And I'm not long on compassion, but let's face it, it's not very glamorous. They don't get paid very much. Their egos are bound up. Are bound up in being experts. And along comes somebody like myself. Shock's not so bad because he's got all his PhDs and stuff. But somebody like me, from out of left field, saying, you're all wrong. Everything you've thought and worked for 30 years doing has to be rethought. They don't really like you very much for that. And actually, there's a great story. I remember, I don't know about you, I remember teaching tales that I remember from childhood, 10, 11 years old. And they just stuck with me. And I remember that Reader's Digest, 12 maybe. And there was a little thing, they used to have little stories below. And this is supposedly a true story, that when Jascha Heifetz, the great violinist, was giving his Carnegie Hall debut in the 40s somewhere, at the age of 11, in the audience were the then reigning violin virtuoso. His name was Misha Elman, who people tend not to remember nowadays, my generation, and the great pianist Artur Rubinstein. And about halfway through the concert, Heifetz was 11 when he's giving his debut. About halfway through the concert, Elman turns to Rubinstein and he says, "Boy, hot in here, isn't it?" And Rubinstein says, "Not for pianists." This is a great line. This is a good line. So, with the Sphinx theory, the geologists are fine. The astrophysicists don't have a problem with it. The organic chemists couldn't care less. But for the archaeologists and the Egyptologists, it's hot in here. So
John,
you can appreciate that.
is this structure the same chronology as the Sphinx? Was it?
The core masonry would be. See, the core masonry, those are the blocks that came out of the Sphinx temple when they acquired to expose. Almost certainly they're built in conjunction,
And
yes.
do you know what the purpose of this structure
No.
was?
Nope. I mean, it's supposedly where the pharaoh's body was prepared for burial in the pyramid, which shows no evidence of a burial. So nobody knows. Nobody has
But
even a
every
clue.
pyramid has the same arrangement, like a complex set.
Right.
Valley Temple, other temple nearby, funerary temple, causeway together,
But
and
nobody,
some little pyramids nearby for
yes,
lesser
but nobody-
ladies, whatever.
there's really no documented evidence that this is what they were used for.
Yes, yes.
You don't know. Yeah. So
And-
they make, as I said, they can't say they don't know. They have to invent something, and then all of a sudden it becomes dogma, which is unfortunately.
The water has cleaned up the alabaster, and it really has amazing detail and color
Yeah.
that you usually don't see
'cause it's
in
all-
a normal day of sun. Huh?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, did you tell them about?
Actually, I was before, and then I sidetracked myself.
Right.
But imagine what it's like when the only light coming in is indirect with those little slots, and it's all roofed over, and you have this translucent
Yeah.
plaster floor. And in the niches on the side there are probably statues of Khafra, who may or may not have been responsible for this work. There's certain, for putting on the granite and all of that sort of thing. We don't know. More things still to be solved.
They connected because of the statue.
And the
that was
statue,
found in the
yeah,
pit
the
coming in.
statue we'll see. That's the statue we'll see in the great, fantastic Khafra statue that we'll see in the Cairo Museum.
So, John,
Yes,
so
What?
this is mind-blowing to me
Yes.
here.
I told you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
This is
So
an
there's a couple
architect.
couple things I see
Yeah,
which
go on.
we can't do now,
of
What?
course.
basically. Well, one, you should all look down this line of columns,
Oh, yeah, right.
okay?
Oh my
They're-
God,
they're-
look, it's a line.
I mean, I've been looking at these kinds of things for years. This is within an eighth of an inch, all of them lined up. We can't do that.
Of course.
We still can't.
We can't do that.
Wait till you see tomorrow.
Are you serious?
And is this mortar here?
They had infinite money.
Yeah, but that doesn't hold anything together. That's just so they can
We
slide the blocks in.
we can't do that.
Oh, really?
Okay?
You can't even do
So,
that?
so the stone granite's not absorbent. but
Right,
it's
no, not at
warm.
all.
You put it in the sun, it gets hot. You
Right.
put anything with a liquid on it, it dries.
Right,
So, and they have it on at least two sides, right?
right, yeah.
And if it gets too thick, it pulls the block apart.
Mm-hmm,
If
right.
it's thin, there's a void.
Mm-hmm.
If you slide one on the other, it pushes it all,
Oh, yeah,
right? Like a scraper,
right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So this has to be moved into place, like just
Levitated.
Lowered, yes, levitated.
Yeah, really.
We don't have technology for this.
That,
And the other thing is that they're obviously able to make a level line,
yeah.
and they can make a straight line, but like I think this line isn't straight, okay?
No?
No, it's not perfectly straight.
Oh, yeah, right. No, no, that's-
That means they made this how many ton block?
yeah.
And they made
Lots of
this
time.
ton block
Right.
organically fitting together like this.
Yeah, they do that.
Okay? And they
Right.
didn't lift this up 20 times and fit it
No.
and say, does it work? No, let's take it down
Right,
and chip
right,
a little
right,
more. How
right.
did they do that?
Right, actually, we'll see even more dramatic.
Blows
one
my
with that
mind.
in a
And the
second
real
when we
question
go
is,
around.
why are they doing this all over the world? You can go to Peru, you can
Yeah.
go all over the world and find these megaliths, and they do these
It's a
same
message.
kinds of
It's like,
things.
we can do this.
Oh,
It's up to you
Or
to
maybe
understand.
it's the only thing that will survive a cataclysm. And they know that they have repeating cataclysms, and they want to leave something
They
to
have
survive the next cataclysm.
What they're showing is they have a choice. They have a choice to do this any way they want to
Yeah,
do,
that's right.
and they've chosen this.
Yeah, yeah.
Why?
Yeah,
They don't have to make that block
that's right.
six pieces. They can make it perfectly square.
Sure, that's right. I actually, Garrett, I'm not happy with the hypothesis that they're doing it for. The cataclysms, yes, but that they're sending a message to. This is a fairly common thing.
Yeah.
You know, with
No, that wasn't
certain
what I
things.
said. Yeah,
Oh.
I think they're doing it for cataclysms. They want to put this out here, and they know that 99% of all life is going to get wiped out in every 26,000 years or whatever, and they want this to survive.
I don't know.
They want to leave that.
It's actually, I take my clue from Groucho Marx, who memorably said, "Why should we care about the next generation? What have they ever done for us?"
The man who was here, the guy looking at it from today's human point of
Showed us
view, isn't it?
that one block there has
Yeah.
seven different
Right,
corners.
right.
Yalla, John.
Well, let's go up there, yeah. the Sphinx would have seen its own image rising in the sky, Age of Leo, last Age of Leo, would have been around 10,500 BC, which is a date chosen by Hancock and Boval. And I originally see the Egyptian texts. You put them all together, and they're when Egypt was ruled by the gods themselves, the Netzeru, and they give the names of the pharaohs who ruled or of the gods that ruled, and then another long sequence of what are called the Shemsuhor, the companions or followers of Horus, and they put all of those names together, and you get a gate. Schwaller talks about this in his long chapter, where he gets somewhere around 36,000 BC. Well, that would be the age, the precessional age of Leo before 11,000. And that's my shock initially. Didn't want to hear about that, but he's now come around to being much less conservative and says, you know, it could be that. And listen, when that weathering is so extreme on the enclosure wall there, it could even be older than that. And this is one of the things. I mean, that's really interesting. It's better than Tutankhamun's laundry list. You would think these guys, you would think some of these guys would really say, gee, this is, you know, let's look into this. Because, you know, all the legends of the world, including even the Old Testament, effectively, explicitly, either directly or indirectly, refer to vast cycles of time, the Indian yugas, where civilizations, you know, great civilizations rose and fell, and I don't dismiss those out of hand. And I think the evidence is here to at least make it worth looking into and seeing if you can really come out with something, in some sense or another, definitive. But, you know, a lot of work still to be done, obviously. So let us go down. One more thing I wanted to go just around the corner of the Sphinx and address some of the things that John was talking about. Where's John? Right here. That John was talking about construction techniques, and you see how the blocks have been married to the. They went to a lot of trouble not to cut them off any more than they could, but to marry the granite to the limestone. You'll see.
Well, yeah, you can see here. Like,
right.
Oh, wow, that's complex.
Yeah, and anyhow, where's John? Oh, there he is, over there. Yeah, so
he's having a good time.
This is when we were doing the video, we went to, again, Boris, enterprising guy, and he found that we wanted to address this thing of you know, could we do this today? Specifically this wall here. And they were building in Long Island a cogeneration plant with boilers that weighed 200 tons. And they had the biggest land-based crane in the world could lift the 200 tons. But we posed the problem to the project manager, who was very fascinated by the whole thing. He said, yeah, you know, when you pick, that's the technical term, heavy loads, we like to see how other people did it. So we showed him, you know, a good photograph of this, and he looked at it, and he was astounded. He looked at it, and he said no. He said we could lift those blocks. These are probably 75, 100, 125 tons, but we wouldn't know how to rig them to get them in place with these joints like this. And so, and then, moreover, that to make their pick, they needed a gang of I forget, a few dozen men, and they had to, I don't understand why it took them that long to do it, but they needed to prepare for 6 weeks to lift this one boiler. So here, and the crane itself had to throw, you know, you see those great huge high cranes that can, you know, pick something here and deposit it way over there, but those are relatively lightweight things. They'll take 10, 15, 20 tons. For a crane that could lift 100 tons, it has a real stubby thing with a huge counterweight at the back, and it can only move at 60 feet. So if these things come from the inside of the Sphinx enclosure, with modern machinery, it would take years to get these stones over to where they are, and then they wouldn't know how to get them up into place. So this is where the whole Sphinx theory, and you see how dangerous it gets for the Church of Progress. whose central dogma, the unchallengeable, it's like the virgin birth in Catholicism, that we're the most advanced people that ever were. And here, not only is there the most spectacular sculpture on earth, but also the temples around it are constructed with the technology that we can't reproduce. Probably if it were important enough to us, we would figure out a way. We can go to the moon. We could probably do it if we wanted to. But the fact remains that we can't do it. And we don't know how they did it. So this opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities. The only one that I'll just do this briefly, the only one that the quackademics will accept is that, well, it was primitive technology, used skillfully. And that sounds ridiculous when you look at what's in front of your nose there, but maybe not. In other words, I like to play devil's advocate for myself. And for example, if I tell you that if you put a violin in my hand, I will prove to you that you can't get music out of that device. But somebody who studied it for 30 years can do that. So that's possibility one. I will break it down 4 possibilities, not necessarily mutually exclusive. Second possibility, it's a hard technology that we have no evidence of, but that they had. Again, the evidence there is no evidence explicitly, but maybe we're looking at something the wrong way. This has been put forward by a number of people. For example, again, analogy, 10,000 years from now they discover a computer. They don't have electricity anymore, or they get it from a different source. There are no moving parts, so they think it's a religious device, which in effect it is. But there's nothing to tell them that they can store the Library of Congress on a couple of chips inside this mechanical device. So maybe we're looking at things like ankhs or little amulets or something like that are actually devices that have simply mystified us. Fact remains they could do it, and I don't much like that hard technology idea, but you can't say that it's impossible. Third one, this is one I much prefer. It's a soft technology and for which there are analogies, that people at a higher level of consciousness than ourselves can do things that to us look impossible. And there are certain instances of this proven. For example, there are cases where a woman's child gets run over, woman picks up car, moves it off child. Can't do that before, she can't do it afterwards. Really advanced martial arts masters can do things that seem to be absolutely impossible. There are even parlor tricks. I've never seen it done, but I have it verified from friends of mine, where you put somebody on a chair and you lift it with your finger, and the 4 guys who are holding it with their finger get into some sort of a meditative state, and they go and they lift them up. There's an account of a Swedish engineer. If you look it up, you Google it up, I forget his name, but you probably find it, who's working with or visiting Tibetan lamas, and he cites, it was published in a German engineering magazine, he talks about the monks chanting and blowing on those fantastic tuba things that they have, and he describes they're levitating rocks to a road that they're building, and he describes very clearly what the circle of monks that it looks like, and that the blocks sort of levitate of themselves. Sometimes they wobble and fall to the ground. They don't get them all up there, but they get the blocks up there. When we were doing Mystery of the Sphinx, we went to a Tibetan monastery out in California to see if they knew about it, and they said they knew about it, but they'd never seen it either. So, case still open. But I sort of like possibility 3, that people in a higher level of consciousness than us, because if you can do it, if we have this capacity within us, and apparently lots of us do, it just takes the right kind of emergency to bring it out, then there's no reason why, in principle, you couldn't train people if you knew what you were doing in order to be able to perform these extraordinary feats. That's a possibility 1, simple technology done by conscious geniuses. It would be my favorite pick for how they did it, but it is not to say that's how they did it and we don't know. And the fourth possibility, favorite one with the UFO community, is that aliens done it. And I don't dismiss that, but it's my least favorite one. It's simply, how did they get so smart? And if they were that smart, why would they come here? Unless it was jail time or something like that, get sentenced to come here. So anyway, that's the, when you look at it face to face, as I said earlier, that it's one thing to read about it, and you look at pictures and you say, okay, that's pretty impressive, but there we are in front of these things, and they did it, and you look at some of the jointing. Some places, maybe earthquakes or something, have separated the blocks a little bit, but if you look at some of them, you see that the jointing is as good. When you take a knife and you go a little bit back, the jointing is as good as it is on those granite blocks inside. There's zero tolerance. It's breathtaking, and once you see it, you tend to be as contemptuous of modern academics as I am. Because a lot of people think, oh, come on, it's really extreme. But when you see what they're not addressing, you realize what frauds they are. Basically, this is. I mean, if academic malpractice were a crime, those guys would not be walking around loose. So, okay, let us go back up, and I think let's see where's the highlight. The museums of the world were filled with reconfigured dinosaurs. So this whole ancient civilization question is of that nature, is analogous to that, because if suddenly it's accepted, and guys who have their credentials and who have their own real expertise, which happens unfortunately, not generally speaking, to have a philosophical or a spiritual compartment part to it, but if they suddenly even just attacked the physical questions that are involved, we'd probably start getting answers pretty quickly, because it's there to be solved. Anyway, let's go up, and I think the solar boat, very, very clearly, very different. So that's being, if you look at the old, especially David Roberts' wonderful watercolors of 1838, and you just get the plateau exactly as it was then, which is not much. Everything's absolutely covered, but this is completely covered, but this has been exposed to the elements for quite a while, up the plateau where we're not going to walk now because it's just too far and it's too wet and it's too cold to go to a couple of places where we would otherwise have gone. You see far more extreme wind and sand weathering. Anyway, here's what we were talking about before. Where's it? Lane? Where's she?
She's right here.
Yeah, see, and John, you see the way the granite's been cut to marry to the. In other words, they could have cut it. It was easy enough to do it just straight, and they didn't. They left as much as they could, and then married the granite to the core masonry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is this a dead end or something?
This was one of the things actually that when I first came here with Shock, to get a declarative sentence out of him was next to impossible. Everything was conditional, and he moved slowly as geologists do, and it was really frustrating. But gradually came on board. And one of the things that impressed him most was that it was built in stages to test, to back up the notion that it really was built in 2 stages, and the first stage was much older. Okay?
Yes.
So once they started excavating, early 19th century, they knew that there were ceremonial boats buried with the pharaohs, or that they existed because some of the pits that the boat was found were actually boat-shaped. No one ever found any of the boats because all of the boat pits had been plundered. See, wood was very much prized in ancient Egypt because almost nothing grew here. So construction class wood mostly had to be imported from Lebanon, the famous cedars of Lebanon, and a couple of different local trees. But really, wood got recycled and recycled and recycled. So the wood had all disappeared, and then in the 50s, they were cleaning up out here, and the photographs tell sort of the tale. I'm not sure if it's there, but you'll see photographs there sweeping around the south face of the pyramid, and all of a sudden they came across. He's shown here the blocks here. They came across this pit, and so they knew they had an unplundered boat pit, and then they took some of these away. You saw them outside. Some of them are still left in place, and they discovered, and it's one of the most amazing things about it, because here you see that this doesn't look like the joints that we were just looking at in the Valley Temple. They're joints there, and it's hard to imagine when it does rain here. Not often, you see, not often, but to everybody's astonishment, when they took a few of these big blocks away, they found the entire solar boat in effectively perfect condition, which is sort of amazing, because you think stuff would have leaked through and wood would have rotted. No, there was perfectly. But unlike the IKEA version of this boat, there were no instructions. So it took them years to figure out how to put it together, and then certain of the esoteric significance or the symbolic significance of the boat comes forward, because I haven't gotten into this yet, but we will when we get into the mythology, that the king is the living Horus. Horus represents, all of the gods represent cosmic principles. They're the embodiments of cosmic principles. They are not figments of the primitive imagination. Horus becomes, and we'll see how eventually Egypt segues into Christianity. Christianity at its best is sort of remedial Egypt. It's Egypt without the science, but it's all there. And so Horus becomes the Christ, actually, and Osiris is the king is the living Horus, the prototype of humanity. In death, he becomes Osiris, which is the realm corresponding to a certain extent to the Bardo region of Tibet. And in the myth, which we'll go into in considerable length on the way to Abydos, Osiris is dismembered, he's cut into pieces, he comes brought back to life through the magic of Isis, his wife and sister. Much more about this as we go along. But anyway, almost certainly the reason that the boat is put into the pit, all cut up into pieces, is in conformity with the myth, because if you can build a great pyramid, it's no problem building a pit big enough to hold the whole boat. So the objective is that, presumably, symbolically, after death, Osiris gets resurrected, and it took him a hell of a long time to figure out where all of the various pieces went. So you see it, when I was here just a couple of weeks ago, I didn't notice if it was there. They had a piece of it. Where's Sohaila? Closed off. Is it still closed off?
I checked.
Check, because it was closed off in exactly the part where it's the most important to explain and be able to show you stuff, and they had it locked off. Let's see if it is in there. Anyway. Is it, Sohaila? It's closed still.
Just go ahead and open it.
That's too bad. Well, we'll do the best that we can. Anyway, so they put the boat back together, and there were 41. I always thought there should be 42 of these blocks. 42 is the number associated with Osiris, but 41. There's somebody very knowledgeable about this on the last trip, that all of the numbers are almost always astronomical, calendrical. They have numbers in ancient mythologies, ancient legends are almost always significant and rarely ever specific. So when they talk about 40 days and 40 nights, which Moses and pops up a million times in various old legends, it's not literally 40 days and 40 nights. It has a certain symbolic significance. 7 is a number, I'll do a numbers wrap along the way, associated with process and growth. So whenever you see these numbers recur time again, and sometimes they're complicated. Like 42, I said, why only 41? the king is Osiris in death. And my friend on the last trip said, well, on this new astronomical work that's been done, that does correspond to the myth, but Egypt had the year, there's a 360-day ideal year, and then the actual 365-day year. We'll get into this because this is very interesting as well. And there are 36 weeks of 10 days each in the Egyptian calendar, and then an extra 5 days on which supposedly the gods are born, specific gods, which means actually it's the activation. Nothing can happen in a perfect circle. It's unbroken. It's eternal. There's no manifestation. For manifestation to happen, there needs to be an orbit. In other words, it can't be symmetric for a variety of reasons, which in fact is part of contemporary physics. So anyway, the 41 blocks means the 36 weeks of the year plus 5 gives you 41. So it's another way, a nice way of symbolizing the actual creative year. So bits and pieces of the boat, that's the ramada, as it's called. In Spanish, ramada. It's the shade, and they would wet that. How they know that, I'm not exactly sure. So that in the heat, it produces, it evaporates, and you get a certain amount of cooling effect.
There's a cabin.
That's over the cabin. And then over here, let's just go look at what we get here. Over here is the original rope found with the boat. And so this is there's no doubt that this is Khufu's ceremonial funerary boat, or one of 6 funerary boats. And this rope is 5,000 years old, which is pretty old rope.
John, it's
yes.
not only ceremonial.
Well, no, not only that. And you'll see when we get up to it, too bad that they got it blocked off, so some of the most interesting stuff, I can't really show you that directly. But the boats, they had them in the period, they had them in the Mediterranean and Red Sea until quite recently. The boats are put together without mortars, without joints, without screws, without pegs. They're sewn together. They're sewn boats. And the way it works is very time-consuming, and you'll see when we get up there, it doesn't look as though the boat would hold water, but in fact, what happens, they put it in the water, they sew the boat together, and when they put it in the water, the wood swells and the rope shrinks, and they get a really tight, presumably waterproof boat. The advantage of it is, once you've done it that way, is that if there's no Suez Canal and you want to portage the boat from one place to another, say you want to get it to the Red Sea, you untie the rope, you get a whole bunch of strong guys picking up the boards, and you move it as far as you have to move it relatively easily, compared to building a pyramid. And then you sew your boat up again, and off you go, sailing happily off to wherever they went. And now when you see, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the whole, what is it called? What's the word? The theory of dispersion? John, what? Dispersion. That civilization, there's one theory that it all developed independently of each other, and they just happened to come up with the same stuff.
Talk about transforming.
No, that's where it'll come to me. And the other theory is that there was a master civilization, as it were, a big civilization that went all over the place, and that's been, by and large, Spencer, not dissolution, dispersion, something like that. Anyway, that's been out of favor for about 100 years, but it's coming back into favor. Recently, over the last couple of years, they found that there were boats going to around the Mediterranean as much as 200,000 years ago. So they've been building boats for a long time. And when you see the solar boat, that's the best boat up to the clipper ships. I mean, you could go anywhere with that boat if you know your boatmanship. So there's absolutely no reason why all of these societies at some point or another were not able to connect with each other, and almost certainly did. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Laird Scranton, my pal Laird Scranton, who's pretty much proving that underlying all of the ancient myths and legends, there's a common cosmology. It's really a very, it's a very convincing argument, and it may well be. Biblical study is a kind of a minefield that I generally try to avoid, because you get into these long, complicated arguments, and you don't know what's myth, and you don't know what's added on later, and you don't know what's actual history. It's some combination of all of those things. But for example, when they talk about the Tower of Babel, they talk about that there was, one language, that all of humanity spoke one language. Well, it's sort of hard to connect Sanskrit to Eskimo, let's say, or something of the sort. But if they all have a common cosmology, maybe that's the one language, because they seem to have had a common cosmology. The Mexican and South American and the Chinese, they're connected. And the Dogon, Laird started out comparing the Dogon to the Egyptians, which was a little tribe not a big tribe actually, in West Africa. And it's a big body of work, and it's about 5 or 6 books into it. Well worth, if you're really serious about all of this, that you start reading from the first one on and get all of the sequence of books. He writes very well too, Laird. What?
Laird Scranton?
Laird Scranton, The Science of the Dogon, and then on from there.
John?
Anyway, let's continue. What?
Yeah, we will go until there is the line there, so we will return and go up.
And go back up the other way,
This is a 1:10 ratio of the boat, and when we used to go under, it would be exposed straight to the bottom. George, tell
What?
about the little guy.
Well, we won't be able to
No,
see
we
it.
won't see it.
Okay,
So,
that's good idea, actually, to highlight. Yeah, there's been big arguments among the academics who evidently never even rowed a rowboat about whether or not these boats were used or were strictly ceremonial. And on one of my trips, a friend of mine was on, who was an ex-Harvard crew sailor and an international yachtsman. And there's one place, now they've got it, we won't see it, but he was looking at the boat, he was talking about nobody was sure if it had been a boat that was actually used and then used ceremonial as well. And he pointed to a little kind of a gouge right about here. And he said, this boat, not only has it been used, but it's been used in the seas, because only grounding on a coral reef would it goes a gouge like that. If it hit a regular rock, it would be a different kind of a gouge. So that was interesting. And then the argument raged that this is a model, exact scale model of the boat. And you see that there are 5 sets of oars, and you have 2 guys to an oar once you ship the oars into the water. And you have, even if you have, 5 here, so you have 10 oarsmen on either side, 20 oarsmen, and this is a big boat. It's 50 meters, 150 feet. So to get it through the water, to propel it through the water, with just oarsmen, even 20 Arnold Schwarzeneggers would be hard put to keep that thing going. And then so they argue that it must have been a ceremonial boat. And then on another trip, there was somebody on my trip who was in his spare time, he was a lawyer, I think, a real estate, and in his spare time, he made wooden boats. And he's pointed out, and they've captured it here, and you'll see it when we go up there, you see that this is much darker than this. And he looked at the cabin, and he said, the cabin's an add-on, because it's much less weathered than the rest of the boat. When we get up to the boat, you'll see that it really has been out in the weather a long time. It's kind of stupid to have argued that it was weather or not. But the reason that they thought it wasn't was because just the 10 guys, 20 guys couldn't row the boat very, very handily. But if the cabin is an add-on, then when we go to Saqqara tomorrow, you'll see pictures of the boat just like this, with all of the oars in place, and you have 25 or so banks of oars, and you have 100 guys rowing the boat, they'll row the boat just fine. So it's always fun when, as I said, I have people with expertise on the trips, and they fill in lots of the blanks when, I'm not allowed to notice myself. Okay, let's
see
continue.
the pictures here. These are photographs, not like the observation for the flags. Before moving them, and they made total of over 900 tons. When they moved them, here is a picture from above to the lying down dismantled boat, and the wood was in 13 layers. Yeah? And then here they drilled a camera down, so you see the fenders, you see the gangplank, I see some oars, huh? And here is the rope, and the problem became which piece where to fit it together, and John told you it took many years in order to put it together, about 20 years.
You see, over here, this is where I was talking before, these have not been moved. And it's hard to imagine, you look at the joints, you would think that the water would leak through onto the boat, wouldn't you? Yeah. And yet it didn't. I mean, every single piece. When we get up there, it's funny, there's one oar that seems to be warped, and everything else was in perfect condition. And then when I get people who know what they're talking about, they look at that oar, and then there's a reason why it is the way it is. We'll see that. But it's sort of fun. This is one of the things why.
John, how did they keep the water out of this pit?
That's what I mean. As I said, it looks like it would leak through. And yet when the boat was found, it was in perfect condition. What are you saying? What?
There was debris all
What?
over.
What?
Anyway,
From what?
There was a lot of sand. They had to
Yeah, but the
excavate.
sand, but stuff
was
leaks through the
protected.
sand.
You are right.
No, it should, you would think, anyway. And they found subsequently, just beyond this pit, they've discovered another one, also intact, that they're debating because when they excavated this in the 50s, there were a lot of things that they could have tested for that they didn't test for, like soil quality and bacteria and all kinds of fine science, as it were, that they didn't think to do. And so now they're scratching their heads about whether or not they're going to even excavate the other boat and reconstruct it or leave it there. Nobody knows, but there were a lot of things that they could have found out of ancient practices and things like that that they didn't. This is, it's 60 years ago, and the scientific side of Egyptology was not as advanced as it is now.
I thought in your book it said that, or the guidebook, that the boat was disintegrating. This one that's been dug out because it was poorly.
I'm not sure. No, I thought it was. I think.
Is it okay?
I think everything was intact, or a couple of little pieces were.
All of them were intact except for a few ends. Just a few of them had the little treatment, and the pictures show some of that they did a lab, and there was a very famous chemist, Dr. Yusuf, I forgot his name. He treated and he restored some of those, kind of like, when the wood gets kind of burned.
Yeah.
Just the ends of some of the wood pieces, but the rest of it was perfect. And the wood is so thick, each piece, and some of them were meters long. Look how long is this one. See? That's a picture for one large one. To be placed on the bottom here to put it together. Thick. Holes in this part inside and good,
But it's
solid.
It's not deteriorating now that it's hit the air?
No, not at all. Look at how they have sewn it. This is a sewn boat, as John told you. See how, and the ropes, you saw them? We used new ropes. And the only two things we used new is new ropes, and they change them every so years. And one of the oars, and John will show you that upstairs, will show you why they had to change. Now, since we are here, we can look up. Well, that's scaffolding. See beyond.
What kind of wood is that?
Cedar.
Cedar of Lebanon.
So
Yeah.
they treated it or fired it or something? Or?
Well, no,
Fumed
only
it?
imported
Fumed
it.
it?
What?
Fumed it? I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, because natural cedar doesn't take on that dark.
Oh, well, it's been
Maybe
used.
time?
Well, no, because it's used out in the open a lot. That's why it's a, you'll see when we get up there, that apart from the gouge on the prow, it's obviously been out in the weather a lot. And
Oh,
you see
here
that
is
the
Dr.
cabin
Newton.
hasn't been, the wood's relatively new.
Here is Dr. Yusuf, the man in the back behind Rooney. She's taking picture. That's the man who did the restoration of some of the wooden pieces that needed restoration, and the boat was polished in a transparent polish. Yeah, there is a picture of that. They polished each, something to defend.
Okay, this is the one oar there. That's what I now remember. That had to be replaced. That was disintegrating. But then you see this other curved one down here, and they say, well, that's the only piece that's warped. But when I was here with my yachtsman friends, they laughed and I said, that's a sculling oar, it's called, when you want to move the boat into or out of its mooring. You have to move it sideways and go sort of like this with that oar, and it moves it either in or out. So it's not a mistake. Also, when you look at it here, you see that that's been out in the elements a very long time. And here now you really see clearly that that's much, much newer. So that's an add-on. So when it's a boat that's being used, it has a whole bank of oars, and it would have had a mast there and a big square sail. So it would be absolutely, you could use it to go anywhere. I mean, with a boat this size, this is 3 times the size of the boat that Columbus the horrible caravels that he managed to get to America on. This is an infinitely better boat. It's beautifully hydrodynamic, and according to my yachtsman friends, that looks like a kind of weird way to steer the boat instead of having a rudder. But according to them, if you know what you're doing and you have trained oarsmen, you can have them, doing, one's going forward, one's going backwards, and the 2 guys who are manning the steering oars can move them in various ways so that in fact you can do very complicated, delicate maneuvers with this big thing, with those kinds of, if you know what you're doing. So, point being that this is a very seaworthy craft, and you can go anywhere with this. If Columbus could get across the Atlantic, this could go any place. And so, when they come up with the hypotheses like there are certain Egyptian artifacts that seem to come from Australia, and the academics laugh, it's not at all difficult to get that boat over to Australia. So it doesn't mean that all of this. Let's have some nutty guys there. This guy Gilroy, you know him, Jennifer? Gilroy, who says there's us Australian who talks about all of these Egyptian artifacts that they found. But he's, I think, something of a nutter. But nevertheless, doesn't mean that they can't be real. Have you seen the Gosford hieroglyphs? That's all the way to the other side of Australia. They're interesting. Yeah, they're interesting. Anyway, but according to the myth, actually, see, this has a very interesting symbolic value. In the myth, in the pyramid texts, they talk about the pharaoh, the divinized or realized human being. But the pharaoh is, it's not that the pharaoh is the absolute ruler, and he is, but that's not the point. The point is that he's the prototype of the human being that can become a god, effectively. And in the myth, the line in the pyramid text, the oldest known text, is that that when the king dies, Ba unites with Ka. The Ba, the arguments over what the Ba and what the Ka represent. There's 7 different, let's say, spiritual entities within the Egyptian, the esoteric tradition, most of which don't really have equivalents in English, so it's hard even to talk about them. And then there are arguments over exactly what they represent. The explanation I like best, I think I got it from Schwaller or from Lucy, I don't even remember it so long ago, is that Ba, who is often shown as a bird with a human head. As soon as you see birds, you're talking about spirit. The only other instance of a god with a animal body and a human head is the Sphinx, strangely enough. Everything else is sometimes it's just the animal itself, or insect or bird, and sometimes it's a human figure with the head of the animal or bird or whatever, in some cases representing a priest playing that role. In other instances, I don't know. Anyway, in the myth, the Ba, as I understand it, is the divine spark that we are all, without exception, born with, but it's unindividualized. And if we don't do our inner work, when we die, the Ba goes back to the divine gene pool, and we've had it. That's the last anyone sees or hears about us. The Ka is the complex of personalities that we all have, most of which do not come together. They have to be when Osiris is, and it's very complex. It has to do with time and the nature of time itself. But when Osiris is dismembered, effectively what's happened is the various, call them psychic or psychological parts, do not know each other. This is normal. I mean, this is our normal state as human beings. We play different roles, and the roles don't always necessarily even recognize each other. I mean, a man can be, the boss at home, a slave at work, a jerk on the field, all these different things. A woman can be a nurse in one context, a lover in another context, the nurturer of the baby in another context that's active rather than receptive, and so on and so forth. We're very complex beings. So the Ka is the part that needs to be reunified or remembered, literally remembered. And in the myth, what happens is that the Ba unites with Ka, becomes a star. In other words, a stellar, literally a star. And whether or not they mean that literally or not, interesting question. I'm not sure what they mean. Anyway, becomes a star, joins the company of Ra, the solar principle, the sun, and sails with him across the sky in his boat of millions of years. That's the boat of millions of years. Usually called the solar boat, not inaccurate. Boat of millions of years is better, effectively meaning that the king's identity is eternal. It's there forever, and that's the meaning of the cartouche, that strange oval shape where the king's name is. That's what that is. You'll see it tomorrow probably, or anyway soon. It's called the Shen Ring of Eternity. It's a ring with a bar underneath that's tied. Exactly what that represents, I'm not 100% sure, but when you stretch it like this into an oval, so you can put the king's name in it, it becomes the cartouche, which seems to have a kind of magical quality. Everybody comes to Egypt wants a cartouche with their name in it. And effectively what the cartouche is saying, that the king's individuality is eternal and divine. It lives forever. Now, this comes down, the Isis, Osiris, Horus legend is who's read Hamlet's Mill? Nobody read Hamlet's Mill. It's one of the seminal books of this whole reawakening of the ancient, but it's written by two MIT historians of science back in the 60s, one called Giorgio de Santillana and another one called Herta van Dekend, German. And they show, it's called Hamlet's Mill because they show that the Hamlet myth occurs in virtually every society, sophisticated and traditional. Anywhere you go in the world, there's an equivalent of that Hamlet myth. Of course, the one we know best is Shakespeare, which comes from Denmark. It's Omlodi's Mill, actually. And it has a lot of, all kinds of different astronomical associations, unmistakably so. The academics do not like this book, and if it has astronomical associations, since only modern astronomers are stupid enough to be interested only in the mechanics of the heaven rather than the meaning of the mechanics of the heaven, they ignore the Santayana and Rondequin's really very important work. But anyhow, so the myth, the Hamlet myth, comes down through the ages. And how many have seen the Disney version, not the play, but the movie of The Lion King?
Of course.
Yeah? What?
Classic.
Yeah, classic. But even the critics, who should know better, didn't recognize that they were watching Hamlet. Did you watch it when you saw it?
Well, I was a child, but
you didn't know it was Hamlet then.
Yeah.
It's Hamlet. But interesting part there's one part of the movie where the little lion cub is looking up at the stars, and he says to his father, "What are those?" And the father says, "Those are the souls of dead kings," which means that whoever wrote the script, and I don't know whoever wrote it, knew their Egypt, because that's not in Hamlet. So this is a very interesting instance, and the boat itself carries, it's symbolic, but it's symbolic in very interesting ways. I mean, apart from the story I just told you, the oars, we'll see lots of instances of boats like this in the funerary texts, with an entourage of gods and people at the helm. And the characters at the helm are two of three. I'm sure if you knew enough about the context, which I don't, you'd know why those two and not the other two, or however it works. Anyway, the three characters, and remember, this is the boat that steers you, that takes you into and through eternity. So the boat is steered by, at the oars, three characters, two of any three. One is Sia, which means consciousness. The second one is Hu, which means effectively action, the verb. And the third is called Heka, which is magic. And magic is to be understood not as conjuring, but rather as a science of transformation. So in other words, the whole thing, this whole huge boat with all of the divinities on top of it, is being powered by consciousness, action, and transformation. And then suddenly the whole thing starts looking as a life lesson rather than as a charming ancient myth. I mean, that's the only way any one of us is going to get anywhere, is through consciousness, action, and transformative action, not just dumb action. So there is a lot involved in this extraordinary boat. And meanwhile, I just pointed out to you now, but look at the strange poles that hold up what would otherwise be the Ramada, at the shape of them. I won't say anything now, but you'll see an instance of what they're representing here. There are 36 of them, 18 on either side, so it's representing the year, the perfect year, the boat, the eternal year. So there's a symbolism. You get something of an idea here that everything has this symbolic function, which is also a practical function, and which is a really brilliant way to go about doing anything that you're doing. And when we go through Egypt, you'll see everything, spoons have a sacred aspect to them. Everything has a sacred aspect to them. So it means, as long as you accept that the sacred science really is a science, it means that everything that they do in life has a connection with a deeper aspect of our own, let's say, our own function within the grand cosmic scheme. And as I said, the more you study it, I've put in obviously a lot of study, but continually running up against how much there still is to be learned and how much there is to be known. If you look over the side here, this is known as Highland Gangplank, because she was the first one to notice, at least point out to me, that that's a gangplank that's hit the ground a couple of 100,000 times, and how the scholars could, assuming that it's intrinsic, that it belongs to the boat, it's obvious that's taken a lot of use. Could say that, well, the boat was constructed separately and they just put on this old gangplank because they needed a gangplank and didn't want to bother to make a new one. But we'll go along with the part of the boat that actually served as
bury a mystical boat.
What?
If you're going to bury a mystical boat, you
Yeah.
might as well just throw a bunch of junk in there with it.
That's right. Yeah, something of the sort. Right. Anyway, that's pretty much the solar boat. It's too bad we couldn't get down below to look at these other bits and pieces of evidence, but good enough. We've got a good taste of.
Do they have any
solar
evidence
boat.
of anything in the hold?
I don't know. Good point. In fact, it's that sort of thing that they could, had they thought about it, you could do all kinds of.
You can still do genetic testing on this
Yeah,
wood,
you
though.
could. Oh, yeah, you could.
I don't know enough about this cedar.
Yeah, cedar.
I don't know enough about cedar to say for sure, but there's got to be descendants of this tree somewhere in Lebanon.
Oh, you would think. Oh, yeah, well, I think that's how they just established that it's cedar of Lebanon, I'm not sure, but it seems to be a given that that's where the cedar comes from. So, I don't know, but yeah, there are probably all kinds of tests that they could do to reveal delicacies of nuances of meaning and purpose and so on.
I wonder if anybody ever thought of making a replica and try to sail it, how it would behave on water. That would probably take quite a while to model it, yeah.
I don't know, but
You've got the catalog of all the parts.
well, you see the replicas down below.
Yes, could probably float.
But somebody, actually, Thomas, somebody told me, might have been Lucy Lamy, Schwaller's stepdaughter, who I worked with closely when I was writing The Serpent, that somebody had done that, and that it was quite fantastic. I mean, you look at it and you know that it's going to work. It's not necessarily as seaworthy as, let's say, the Viking ships, which have a much broader beam because they're sailing across the North Atlantic. Mm-hmm. But I'd happily go on this anywhere in the world if I had enough.
Supposed to cruise.
What? Yeah, it would be fun. Well, actually, they have now, up until 1900 or so, they had what they called dahabeas, which were descended from these. And Florence Nightingale and Amelia Edwards, 1,000 miles up the Nile, and some of the early travelers talked about sailing up Egypt, up the Nile on these dahabeas, which were like this, had a sail and guys rowing, and they were fun. And then they went out of fashion as as they got the big cruise boats and things like that. And then recently, maybe in the last dozen years or so, they started doing them again, but now without guys rowing because it gets expensive, but without motors, still without motors, with a big square sail, maybe now a little lateen rig sail, and a little tug behind it pushing it along instead of an engine. And blah, blah, blah. And Muhammad actually owns probably the best of the dahabeas. When Suzanne Mubarak wanted to steal somebody's boat and use it for a day to impress her friends, she always picked Muhammad's boat, for which he didn't pay. But nevertheless, I guess he extracted favors of one sort or another. But we take that boat sometimes when I have a dedicated group, then I can count on filling it up because it only has 8 cabins, and it's really quite delightful. But I can't do it with a regular group because I have to book it a couple of years in advance, and I'm never sure if I'm going to get the people together. So I can only do it when I have a particular school or that kind of a study group or something like that. So,
John, that damage you spoke of on the keel can be seen. It's probably not the most ideal, but you can probably get some telephoto lenses to
can you
pick it out. You can see it. You got to go
from the front. Yeah. Well, I do have photos, close-up photos of it because when we could get down there, it was really much better to be down there than up here. But anyway, we got the point.
Yeah.
So there was no sail here. It was just.
What?
Was it a sailboat? No.
Would have been. Yeah. Without the cabin on. See, the cabin's an add-on. You can see how you can see it, the new wood. So when it's not there, then
there's a sail.
Big sail with a mast, a big square sail.
Is there the room for the?
Absolutely, yeah. And then the whole bank of oars all the way along.
And some of them will attach probably at the end and the part of the sail structure.
You'll see it in Saqqara tomorrow. You'll see the boats being in use. Yeah, even you can see them furling the sails. You can see them organizing.
Is there any similarity with the feluccas or the?
Oh, the felucca probably is a descendant of these boats. Over a number of there are a number of changes to get it into a felucca, including the rigging. The felucca has this lateen rig, and these had a square rig. Do you sail it? A little bit about it. Okay, let's go, guys. Let us go back